Hello, so this video is going to be on some observations I made while sparring with the spear and the bokken. Now this is the actual spear of the live head, not the reenactment spear head. But if you saw during the video, the spear head kept flying off quite a lot, and that was just simply because I need to probably sand it down a bit more and maybe hammer it on a bit more firmly. So it meant when the bokken sort of had an impact like that on the spear head, it would keep knocking it off. But regardless, we learned some very interesting things when sparring with this, sort of polearm versus sword, and stuff that might actually surprise you unless you've done a bit of sparring yourself. So I think it's definitely worth doing a bit of sparring if you're interested in training, sort of in the use of you know, like primitive weapons, I guess you'd call them. Well, not necessarily primitive weapons, but you know what I mean. Pre-firearms weapons, sort of melee weapons. And that's just how much more effective a polearm is than the sword for a lot of engagements. And I know a lot of channels have said this before and I'd sort of come to that conclusion. But when you actually start using them, you'll see why. Now, obviously a spear has a reach advantage compared to a sword. So one of the main advantages of the spear, obviously, is that you actually don't need to move as much. Let me show you what I mean. So, if I just put the bokken down a second. With the spear, now I'm going to be careful not to stab the camera, and I've got the door behind me. You obviously can just thrust like this. You don't need to move your legs too much. You know, you've got a lot of thrusting ability. Now you can move your legs and thrust even further, but the point is with the spear, you can keep sort of doing this, and you can keep sort of probing, and you can keep your opponent back by doing that. When you're using a sword, especially because unless it's going to be a great sword with massive length to it, you've got a reach disadvantage. So with the sword, you're going to have to be stood a lot more like this, and you're going to have to keep moving forwards and backwards, which you hopefully saw me doing in the sparring video if you watched it. You're going to have to use a lot more footwork, so you're tiring yourself out more because you're both having to swing the sword more, I found, to try and keep your opponent off guard. You know, you're having to do this a lot, twirling the sword, you know, doing feints and, you know, trying to probe into open gaps. So you're having to do a lot more arm movement, and you're having to do a lot more leg movement, and I'd say as well you're mentally having to do a lot more when you're using a sword, because you're having to sort of keep thinking where's the spear coming from next if you're going against the spear with your sword. So that was something I found really interesting, that actually in terms of both concentration and the physical sort of fitness level, you need a lot more using a sword than the spear, which is another thing that, you know, goes to the advantage of the spear for a lot of these sort of engagements. You know, it's going to be less tiring using the spear. And as said, we talked about logistics before in these videos. You could mass produce spears far cheaper than you could mass produce swords for sort of a military engagement. So hopefully you might actually be able to see on the bokken, there's actually a load of gouges taken out of it now, where, you know, coming into impact with people and the spear when we were sparring, it's actually done a bit of damage to the bokken. So yeah, as you can see, it's actually been used and tested, and yeah, it did perform very well. I enjoyed using it. I did find as well there was some advantages to using a stance like this, because as said, I prefer using pretty much any sword in a European style sabre stance, or a fencing stance kind of thing when you're using, you know, a sword like this, rather than using it two-handed. There goes the light. But basically, I did see why there were some advantages to doing it like this. So while you don't have the reach advantage holding a sword like this, and more of you is open to being attacked, the advantage you do have is it's less tiring swinging the sword about, and if you're knocking away an opponent's weapon, you get a lot more leverage with two arms. That was one of the things I found, that when I was doing it in this kind of thing, when Bart was thrusting the spear towards me, I could sort of do this and knock it away a lot more. So there are advantages to using the sword in this kind of grip compared to this one, although I'd say I primarily, for this one, also edge alignment is a lot easier. Doesn't really matter with a bokken, but edge alignment is a lot easier when you're using a sword like this compared to using it like this. When you're thrusting the sword about a bit more, you're going to start losing your edge alignment a bit if you're using it sort of one-handed. So that was some of the interesting things I found, but this does raise points if you're thinking about sort of these sort of weapons for an actual survival scenario or something like that. Is in some sort of scenario like that, you're going to tire yourself out much faster using something like a machete or a short sword. Simply because, as said, you don't have the reach advantage and you have to do a lot more footwork to not make yourself an easy target. A polearm is definitely got an advantage when it comes to you know, you can thrust with a polearm a lot more and use less energy. And the reach advantage is definitely a big factor, I think. Being able to be in a good position, obviously keep thrusting, and I'm doing it with the sword rather than the spear, but you know, being able to do that uses a lot more energy, uses a lot less energy, you know, and a lot less concentration than if you're having to constantly move back and forth with the sword trying to get in and out before you're struck. So, that's just some interesting things I learned from the sparring. I'll definitely be doing more sparring videos now. We had a lot of fun. It's just arranging when we're both free to do it. I'm trying to get Bart to order his own bokken so we can do a bit of like sword sparring kind of ones, both of us with a weapon that makes us a bit equal. Hopefully as well we'll get the spear set up properly the next time we do it so the head doesn't keep flying off, so the spear has a slight more reach advantage. But yeah, overall it was very fun. Definitely enjoyed it. Sparring is definitely a good, you know, kind of physical contact activity. I didn't end up too bruised. I'm not sure about with Bart how bruised he ended up being afterwards, because I generally I think scored more hits than him, but again that's because I've got more of these sort of things in my house than he has, so I've got a bit more practice just swinging them about and sort of doing footwork with them. But overall, yes, it was very fun. So sparring is definitely good fun. Like I said, good bit of physical sport. The safety precautions we took was just, you know, to wear riot helmets each and not aim for each other's heads, so you're not going to do really spinal or head injuries to each other. And obviously we weren't trying to hit each other as hard as possible with the swords or the spear. The point was we were trying to score a hit. One thing we definitely need to get better at is obviously knowing when we've hit each other to just kind of back off to sort of reset it, sort of thing, because often I think we were hitting each other and then just carrying on, which was good fun, but you know, like I said, you also kind of think need a referee for that a little bit, you know, just because of the fact that when you're actually in the thick of it, you're not always going to notice. It's a bit like airsoft or any of these things. You can sometimes take a hit and not notice because, you know, you're really in the mindset of, you know, being in the game and everything. And it's not necessarily that you want to be cheating, it's just that, you know, you're getting so into it that you're not noticing like a very minor hit. So yeah, it was good fun. I definitely recommend sparring to people who haven't really thought about doing it. It gives you a much better appreciation of some of these weapons and how they actually handle when you're having to use them against a real live opponent and avoid their attacks, you know, while trying to strike with your own. But yeah, spears again, I think a lot better than swords for most people from the experience I've had, you know, sparring now.